I've never considered myself paranoid, but that night, something in the air triggered every instinct I had. We were seated around my in-laws' grand dining room table, polished mahogany, silverware gleaming under chandelier light, wine glasses lined like soldiers. To anyone else, it might have looked like a loving family dinner. For me, it was a performance, and I'd been cast in a role I didn't audition for. I had just returned from a week-long photo assignment in Montana. Icy trails, wildlife tracking, sleeping in tents, and capturing moments that could pay our bills for months. I was tired, worn down to my bones, but my wife insisted we attend her mother's birthday dinner. It wasn't optional. Just a few hours, she'd promised. Everything felt scripted, polite small talk, forced smiles, passive-aggressive remarks hidden behind wine-filled laughter. Then came the moment that would change everything. My mother-in-law, Diane, re-entered the dining room with a tray of sangria-filled glasses. She disappeared into the kitchen for a few minutes, and out of habit, or perhaps suspicion, I followed behind to offer help. That's when I saw it. She was standing with two glasses separated from the others. Her back turned slightly. She pulled out a small dropper bottle and carefully added a clear liquid into just one of the glasses. No fruit, no garnish, just a few drops of something invisible. She moved with practiced ease, tucking the bottle away just as I stepped in. "Ah, I've got this, Julian," she chirped, overly bright. "This one's special, for my favorite son-in-law." The smile was tight. I thanked her, picked up both glasses she had prepared, and brought them to the table with the rest. Quietly, without fanfare, I swapped the special glass meant for me with the one in front of my father-in-law. The man had never hidden his disdain for my profession or lifestyle. Somehow, it felt appropriate. I declined the sangria, saying I preferred water with dessert. No one questioned it. 45 minutes later, my father-in-law turned pale. His forehead glistened with sweat, and he clutched his stomach before hurrying down the hall. The sounds of violent illness echoed from the guest bathroom. Diane's face turned the color of ash. She looked at me from across the table, frozen, lips parted slightly, fear blooming in her eyes. And in that moment, it was no longer a suspicion, it was certain. She had intended to drug me. And now she knew that I knew. I didn't say a word, I didn't stand up or shout. I simply ate my slice of chocolate cake while my wife rushed to check on her father. Later that night, I sealed the untouched glass in a plastic bag and slid it into my car trunk. I wasn't angry in the way people expect, no shouting or fists on the table. My fury was quiet, focused. Something had shifted. It didn't plan to fight back her way. I would do it my own. My name's Julian Mercer. I'm 32 years old, a professional photographer based out of Asheville, North Carolina. I've been self-employed for nearly a decade, running my own business with little more than a camera, a stubborn streak, and a belief that the world is worth capturing. What started with local weddings and small-town events grew into a career that's taken me to mountain ridges, foreign cities, dense forests, and even magazine covers. I've photographed endangered wildlife in sub-zero temperatures, shot features for international travel publications, and captured moments that people hang above their mantles for generations. It's not glamorous, not always, but it's real, and it's mine. To most people, that would be enough, but not to my in-laws. For them, photography wasn't a career. It was a hobby, a phase, a placeholder for something more legitimate. Ollie Joel. My father-in-law was the type of man who lived in spreadsheets and country clubs. He'd made his fortune in investment banking, the kind of person who calculated a man's worth by his salary, his square footage, or the emblem on his car. Every family gathering came with the same line: "How's the little photography gig going?" The tone wasn't curious, it was condescending, as if you were asking about a child's lemonade stand. Then there was Diane. She never openly insulted me the way Gerald did. Her critiques came gift-wrapped in compliments. That photo of the deer in the snow, just lovely. Have you ever thought of doing something a bit more stable, though? Something with benefits? She always smiled when she said it, like she was doing me a favor by suggesting I give up what I loved. Whenever we attended their family dinners, I played the part of the polite outsider. Gerald would prod about our finances, masked as casual conversation. Diane would monopolize Haley's time in the kitchen, asking about future plans when she might consider settling down somewhere more practical. They'd fawn over their son Owen, an orthopedic surgeon with a spotless record and a picture-perfect wife named Vanessa, while treating me like I was Hayley's artistic detour before she got serious about life. Hayley, for her part, tried her best to bridge the gap. She'd squeeze my hand under the table during particularly cruel comments. She'd compliment my work in front of them, try to defend my career choices in subtle ways. But nothing stuck. No matter how many high-profile clients I landed or spreads I had in major publications, to them, I was still just the guy with a camera and a dream, someone they were waiting for her to outgrow. And yet, despite everything, I kept showing up. I brought expensive wine to dinners. I talked about new projects I was excited about. I nodded along to Gerald's stories about market trends I didn't care about and complimented Diane's pot roast, even when it was overcooked. I smiled in photos, even when I was accidentally cropped out of the ones she posted online. I told myself they'd come round eventually. I told myself if I just proved myself enough, they'd see that I wasn't some flaky artist drifting through life. I wanted them to see that I was building something meaningful with their daughter, that I was worth her love. But time only deepened their disapproval. Last Christmas, I overheard Diane on the phone with someone, her sister maybe, saying Hayley could have married Thomas, family money, a real future, but she chose the creative one. The way she said creative made it sound like a diagnosis. Hayley was worse. After Hayley and I confided in them that we were planning to start a family, he pulled me aside with the gravity of a financial advisor breaking bad news. Kids are expensive, he said, one hand on my shoulder. You might want to think about getting a real job before bringing one into the world. I laughed it off at the time, not because it was funny, but because I didn't want Hayley to see how much it stung. She adored her parents, even when they didn't deserve it. I didn't want to put her in the middle. Didn't want to force her to choose. So I kept my mouth shut, smiled when Diane called me the photographer in introductions instead of her son-in-law, bit my tongue when Gerald talked about stock portfolios like they were sacred texts. I told myself they'd soften over time. But, as I would learn, their coldness wasn't just about disapproval, it was about power, control. And that night, with the sangria glass in my trunk, I realized I'd been playing by their rules all along. That was going to change. There's a kind of hostility that doesn't raise its voice, it doesn't slam doors or hurl insults. It lingers in looks that last a second too long, in polite conversation that's too carefully worded, and in the invisible distance people build around someone they don't want to accept. That was the kind of tension I faced with Diane and Gerald. It showed itself in 1,000 small gestures, individually insignificant, collectively impossible to ignore. Like how Diane always seemed to need Hayley's help in the kitchen whenever I'd brought up a recent project I was proud of. Or how I'd find myself inexplicably excluded from candid family photos, cut from the frame like a forgotten guest. Once, when I offered to take a picture instead, Diane replied sweetly, "Of course, dear, you're the photographer after all." Like I was hired as help, like I didn't belong. Then there were the moments that were harder to ignore. The pointed barbs from Gerald were disguised as fatherly advice. "Have you ever considered doing something more stable?" he once asked, as if I hadn't already built a full-time career doing what I love. It might be nice for Hayley to have a little security, especially if kids are in the picture. There was always an if around me, if I settled down, if I got a real job, if I stopped chasing what they saw as a romanticized dream. But the truth was, their doubts had little to do with my job. I could have been a surgeon, a lawyer, or a politician. Anything short of Gerald's reflection in a mirror wouldn't have been good enough. Hayley saw it, even if she rarely said so. Her silence in these moments wasn't complicity, it was weariness. She'd been managing their expectations for years. I could see the fatigue in her eyes when they'd make one of their trademark remarks. She'd press her lips into a thin line, squeeze my hand under the table, and try to move the conversation forward. But there's only so much deflection can do. And still, I clung to the idea that one day they might accept me. Every gift I brought, every magazine spread I casually mentioned at the dinner table, every effort I made to speak their language, it was all in service of that impossible goal, validation. I wanted them to see me the way Hayley did, and I thought foolishly that if I played the long game, they'd finally come around. But then came the moment I should have taken more seriously, the one that should have snapped me out of it for good. A few months before Diane's birthday dinner, Gerald had taken me aside after one particularly stiff evening meal. He gestured vaguely at Haley, who was laughing in the living room with her brother Owen and his wife. "She can be impulsive," he said quietly, "emotional, and we've suggested she speak to someone, therapeutic, just to get some clarity. You might want to support that idea." The implication wasn't lost on me. This wasn't a concern for Haley's well-being, it was a warning, a veiled suggestion that she was unstable for choosing a life with me. Even then, I said nothing. I nodded politely and pretended not to hear the undertone in his voice. Looking back, I regret that, not because I think it would have changed anything, but because silence has a way of feeding control. Every time I let one of their comments slide, every time I pretended not to notice Diane's backhanded compliments or Gerald's smug financial advice, I gave them permission to keep going. They thought I was too weak or too passive to push back. But after what happened with the sangria, the pattern became clearer. The microaggressions weren't random. They were calculated. A long-running campaign to undermine me, to chip away at Haley's trust in me, one carefully worded comment at a time. What I once dismissed as coldness was in truth manipulation. Controlled, sustained, and dressed in the fine china of Southern charm. And the most terrifying realization of all, it was working, just slowly enough that neither Haley nor I had seen the full picture yet. That birthday dinner, though, that glass, was their mistake. Because now I had something more than suspicion. I'd have evidence. The Friday of Diane's birthday dinner arrived, wrapped in exhaustion. I had just returned from a grueling assignment in Montana, where I'd spent days tracking bison across icy plains for a National Geographic feature. My face was still raw from the wind, my shoulders sore from hauling gear through waist-deep snow. All I wanted was a quiet night at home with Haley. But skipping her mother's birthday wasn't an option. "She'll notice if we don't come," Haley said, wrapping her arms around me as I unpacked my gear. "Just a couple of hours, I promise." So I showered, shaved, put on the one button-down shirt Diane had ever complimented, and we drove across town to their pristine colonial-style home nestled in one of Asheville's most expensive neighborhoods. It was the kind of place that screamed generational wealth. Gleaming hardwood floors, oversized furniture, and framed portraits of ancestors I'd never hear the end of. The evening unfolded like it always did. Gerald dominated the conversation with stories of recent investments and business ventures. Diane fluttered between the dining room and kitchen, perfecting centerpieces and wiping smudges from crystal. Owen and Vanessa made small talk, asking polite but safe questions, careful not to veer into anything too personal. I sat at the far end of the table, sipping beer and mentally counting the minutes until I could leave. After dinner, Diane clapped her hands with rehearsed enthusiasm. "Dessert time, and guess what? I made my famous sangria." She disappeared into the kitchen while the rest of us stayed seated, waiting. Haley leaned into me and whispered, "It's actually really good. One of the few things she insists on making herself." I didn't respond. That knot in my stomach from earlier in the day had returned. Tight, insistent, unexplainable. I stood up and offered to help Diane carry the drinks. I hadn't planned to follow her, but something about the way she'd announced the sangria, the overly cheerful tone, the timing, it all felt rehearsed, too perfect. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was standing near the counter, turned away from me. On the tray were several wine glasses, all filled with the same deep red liquid, except for two, which sat slightly apart. I watched as she pulled a tiny vial from her pocket, tipped a few drops of something clear into one of the glasses, and then slipped the container back into her handbag without hesitation. The substance didn't fizz, didn't alter the color, but in the light I caught a faint film dancing at the surface of the liquid. She jumped slightly when she noticed me. "Oh, Julian!" "I've got it," she said quickly, her smile unnaturally wide. "This one's for you, my special recipe for my favorite son-in-law." She held out the glass as if it were a gift, a token of affection, but I saw her fingers tremble ever so slightly as she handed it to me. And I took it with a gracious nod. "Let me help carry the rest," I said, smoothly reaching for both of the isolated glasses, the one she'd handed me and its untouched twin. Back at the table, Gerald was scrolling through his phone, not paying attention. I placed the tainted glass in front of him, without hesitation, careful to match the positioning so it wouldn't look out of place. Then I handed out the remaining glasses and took my seat. Haley smiled, raising her glass. "To Mom." Everyone echoed the toast. I simply lifted my water glass and took a sip. Not drinking, Gerald asked with a smirk. Trying to cut back, I replied casually. Big exhibition coming up. Want to stay sharp. No one pressed the issue. Conversation resumed. Dessert was served. And then came the moment of confirmation. Roughly 45 minutes later, Gerald went pale. His hands trembled slightly as he set his fork down. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead. He mumbled something about his stomach and excused himself from the table. Moments later, the sounds of retching echoed from the hallway bathroom. Violent, relentless, unmistakable. Everyone froze. Haley immediately got up, concern etched across her face. Diane sat motionless, her posture rigid, the color drained from her cheeks. She didn't speak, she didn't move, but her eyes met mine across the table, and that was when I saw it. Recognition. She knew exactly what had happened, and more importantly, she realized I knew too. I didn't confront her, I didn't call her out. Instead, I picked up my fork and resumed eating my slice of chocolate cake, chewing slowly while chaos unfolded around me. Haley knocked on the bathroom door. Owen stood up awkwardly, asking if Gerald needed help. Vanessa offered to call an ambulance. Diane murmured something about bad seafood, her voice barely above a whisper. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was planning. Later that night, I placed the untouched sangria glass, the one she had tried to give me, into a sealed plastic bag. I didn't know exactly what was in it yet, but I knew who would. And I was done waiting for them to respect me. If they wanted a war, I would give them one, just not on their battlefield. I didn't sleep much that night. Ellie and I returned home late. She was exhausted from the stress of the evening, shaken by her father's sudden illness. It must have been something he ate, she murmured as she crawled into bed beside me. I nodded in silence, not ready to say what I knew, not yet. While she drifted off, I sat in my studio, the sealed glass resting on my desk like a quiet accusation. The residue inside shimmered faintly beneath my desk lamp. I didn't want to make assumptions, but my gut told me this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. The next morning, I made a call to Jason, a former client and acquaintance who ran a private toxicology lab. We'd worked together on a documentary about forensic science a couple of years back, and while we hadn't kept in close touch, I knew he was discreet. Personal or professional? He asked when I arrived at his lab 2 hours later, handing him the sealed glass. Family, I replied, and I need to know exactly what was in this. He didn't press for more, just gave me a quiet nod and promised to run tests within the week. Back home, I told Haley I needed to prepare for a gallery show and wouldn't make it to the next family dinner. She seemed disappointed, but didn't argue. We'll just say you're swamped with editing, she said. I nodded. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. While I waited for Jason's results, I started digging. Nothing illegal, nothing extreme, just a careful comb through public records and some light research. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but I figured if Diane had drugged me once, it probably wasn't the first time she crossed the line. It didn't take long before the pattern began to emerge. For one, I discovered Diane had overlapping prescriptions for the same anti-anxiety medication, Xanax, from 3 different doctors. That in itself was shocking. Many people in her social circle had some pharmaceutical crutch. But what raised alarms was the dosage. Refills every few weeks, even when standard prescriptions should have lasted months. Reports of doubling doses, tripling. And then came the town gossip. Stories buried just beneath the surface, rarely spoken aloud but impossible to fully suppress. At a neighbor's cocktail party last spring, Diane had been found in someone's bedroom, rifling through a jewelry box. Nothing was reported because, of course, it wasn't, but whispers had circulated quietly since. At her country club, one member had apparently revoked Diane's invitation to a fundraiser after an invasion involving prescription pills and an embarrassing confrontation in the parking lot. These weren't just rumors. They were warning signs. She wasn't the harmless southern matriarch she pretended to be. Beneath the smiles and pastel blouses, Diane was erratic, manipulative, and increasingly unstable. 3 days later, Jason called. His voice was calm, clinical, but the content of his words sent a chill through my spine. Drank Jolene, there were benzodiazepines in that drink. A significant amount. Not enough to kill anyone, but certainly enough to sedate an adult male for several hours. Possibly induce memory loss, disorientation. I can send you a full report. And you put it in writing. Already done. You want to tell me where this came from? I paused, then said only, I wish I could. That night, I sat across from Haley at dinner, watching her talk about a documentary she'd seen. I smiled, asked questions, listened closely, and said nothing. Oh, yeah? She didn't know, and I needed to be absolutely sure before I dragged her into this. Because what I discovered so far suggested something deeper than an isolated attempt to sabotage my evening. It suggested intent. History. A long-standing pattern of control. One that likely extended far beyond just me. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A few days after I received the toxicology report, Haley brought it up over breakfast, casually, like she didn't think twice about it. I'll need some new photos for a social media thing, she said, a buttering toast. She specifically asked if you would take them. Isn't that kind of weird? Weird didn't begin to cover it. And I kept my expression neutral. Did she say why? Yeah, she wants a more professional online presence. She's joining some local foundation board or something. The moment was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. A trap, possibly. But I wasn't afraid of walking into it. In fact, I welcomed it. Sure, I said, tell her I'll stop by this Saturday alone. Saturday arrived grey and cool. I packed my camera gear meticulously, then slid a sealed envelope into the front pocket of my bag. The one containing the lab report, the pill prescription records I'd printed, and a few screenshots I'd gathered of concerning text messages Diane had sent Haley over the years. Things like, sometimes I wonder if Julian's mental health is stable enough for fatherhood. And it's okay to want more than just an artist with a camera. I rang the doorbell precisely at noon. Diane opened it, wearing pearls and an expensive beige blouse. Her hair was styled into soft waves, her makeup flawless. She looked ready for a photo shoot. Or a battle. Julia, she said, sweet as syrup, come in. I stepped inside. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive perfume. Gerald's at the office, she said, leading me to the sitting room, so we have the place to ourselves. Perfect. Before we start, I said, setting my bag down slowly, I think you should look at this. I pulled out the envelope and handed it to her. She took it with a wrinkle of confusion on her brow, but the moment she opened it and saw what was inside, the color drained from her face. She scanned the toxicology report first, Jason's letterhead, the chemical analysis, and the date of the test, then the prescription lists, then the photos of her texts. Her hands began to tremble. This is absurd, she whispered. I would never... We both know that's not true, I said, cutting her off before she could launch into her usual spin. What I don't know is why. Her eyes sharpened, voice hardening. Because you're not good enough for Haley, you never have been. There it was, the raw truth, the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. I see, I said. My voice was calm, colder than I'd expected it to be. And drugging me? Was that your way of solving the problem? It wasn't meant to hurt you, she snapped. Just make you miss your little art show. I wanted Haley to see what I've seen all along, that you're unreliable, that you don't show up when it matters. I let that hang in the air. Her words didn't land the way she thought they would. I didn't feel rage or shame or even fear. I felt clarity. You got to tell Gerald, I said, everything. You got to stop undermining my marriage, and you got to treat me with the respect your daughter's husband deserves. And she let out a breathless laugh. She'll never believe you, not over her own parents. I picked up my camera bag. Maybe not, but she'll believe a lab report. She'll believe your prescription history, and she'll believe the neighbors you've alienated over the years. Are you willing to bet your relationship with Haley on that? For the first time, Diane had no answer. I left without taking a single photo. That night, Diane called Haley in tears, claiming I had been aggressive and hostile during our meeting. She spun it like I'd stormed in, shouted at her, accused her of terrible things. All of it nonsense. Haley, confused and clearly torn, asked me what had really happened. So I showed her the toxicology report, our prescription records, the text messages. At first she shook her head in disbelief. My mum wouldn't. She wouldn't do this. But her voice lacked certainty. She didn't argue again. She didn't call Diane. She didn't cry. Instead, she crawled into bed that night in silence, turned away from me, and whispered, I need to think. The silence that followed was worse than any argument. For 2 weeks, Haley barely spoke to me. She went to her parents' house alone, came back with red eyes and said nothing about what they'd told her. I knew what they were doing, planting seeds, twisting reality. And slowly, painfully, I could feel her begin to question everything. I had made my move, but the game wasn't over. Not even close. Just as I began to doubt whether I'd ever pull Haley fully out from beneath her parents' shadow, the truth found me. Quietly, unexpectedly, in the form of a small cardboard package on our doorstep. No return address, no branding, just my name, handwritten in unfamiliar cursive. Inside was a USB drive and a note with only 6 words. You should see this, Vanessa, Haley's sister-in-law. Quiet, polished, and always polite, the type who smiled through every family dinner, but whose eyes often mirrored mine. Weary, guarded, watching. I never suspected her to be involved, but I instantly understood why she'd chosen now. I plugged in the drive. The first folder was labeled simply dinner. Clicked. Up came a grainy but clear black and white video feed. Home security footage. Time-stamped from the night of Diane's birthday. There was Diane, in the kitchen, turning her back as she reached for her handbag. The angle didn't give a perfect view, but it was unmistakable. She retrieved a vial, uncapped it, and added a substance to one of the sangria glasses. And then, walking in, her startled reaction, me taking both glasses, a smooth, unspoken switch. Up to the dining room, Gerald, sipping from his glass, Diane's face, moments later, stiffening with dread. The footage had no sound, but it didn't need any. Then came another clip, post-dinner, after we'd gone. Diane was pacing the kitchen, shouting. Gerald is storming in. The angle shifted as they argued. "You idiot," she barked, pointing at the sink. "You dragged the wrong one." And Joel snapped back. "This isn't the first time, Diana. You've pulled this crap before." I froze. For the first time? There was more. Another file. Dated 2 days later. Same room. Same couple. This time, the conversation was calm, but far more sinister. "He knows," Charles said, pacing. "Oh, what?" Diane replied. "It's his word against mine. Haley will never choose him over her family. And if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised." My chest tightened. Gerald didn't flinch. "We have to be careful now." "I've already started," she said coolly. "Been talking to her about the marriage, planting ideas. By the time I'm done, she'll be the one asking for a divorce, and she thinks it's her own decision." I closed my laptop slowly, my hands shaking. This wasn't about a drink. This wasn't even about me. It was a war they had been waging for years, systematically controlling Haley's life, isolating her from anyone who didn't fit their blueprint of perfection. And now they were doing it again, carefully, patiently, methodically, chipping away at our marriage from the inside. I called Vanessa. "Why did you send this to me?" I asked. My voice trembled more than I wanted it to. Her answer came quietly, "Because they did the same thing to me when I married Owen." And I sat down, stunned. "They tried to break us up," she said. "For 2 years, I told him I was manipulative, that I only married him for money. They tried to pit us against each other. Small things at first, subtle, but it adds up. Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Owen doesn't believe me," she admitted. "He still thinks our parents walk on water. I tried, but you know how he is with Dad. Worships him. I just couldn't watch them do it to you too. Not again." Her voice cracked. And for a moment we sat in shared silence. 2 people who'd both, in different ways, been fighting the same war without knowing it. The next morning I received a text from Gerald. "He should talk, just the 2 of us, no wives." I agreed. We met at his country club in a private lounge with dark wood paneling and whiskey-scented air. He poured 2 drinks, handed me one, and leaned back like we were old friends discussing business. "Families are complicated," he began. "My wife, she's protective. She overreacts sometimes, but everything she does for Haley." I stared at the untouched glass in front of me. "Drugging someone isn't protection, it's criminal." He waves a hand. "You're blowing this out of proportion. She probably confused the glasses. It wasn't meant for you anyway." "I have the security footage," I said quietly. That stopped him. His posture stiffened, and the mask slipped. Behind it was something colder, strategic. "What do you want?" he asked, voice low. "Money? Access? You think you can blackmail us?" "I want you to leave us alone. Stop trying to break up my marriage. Stop poisoning my wife's view of me." He leaned forward, eyebrows raised. You think I'm the first one to try to marry into this family? Haley was engaged before you. Nice guy. Dr. Smart. We didn't like his background. Took us 6 months to get her to break it off. His voice grew smug. She came back crying to Daddy, said she couldn't trust him anymore. Chill ran through me. What did you do to her? Nothing she didn't need, Gerald replied. Just a few nudges. Sometimes people need help, seeing what's best for them. That night I called Bethany, Haley's college teammate. The moment I mentioned Thomas, her tone shifted. Oh God, that was a mess. He was amazing. But her parents, they planted fake emails, made it look like he was cheating. By the time he figured it out, she didn't believe anything he said. Everything locked into place. They hadn't just sabotaged my marriage, they'd done it before, and they were damn good at it. At this time, they'd chosen the wrong opponent. After that conversation with Gerald, I knew I couldn't rely on reason. These weren't people who could be argued with. That they didn't need to win by being right. They won by outlasting, outmaneuvering, and undermining everyone around them until there was nothing left but submission. But I had something they didn't. Oof. And people who had finally had enough. Over the next few days, I began to build a case. Not just for Haley, but for the truth itself. I reached out to Thomas, Haley's ex-fiancé. I wasn't sure if he would respond, but after a few cautious messages, explaining who I was and what I was uncovering, he finally agreed to talk. I thought I was going crazy back then, he told me over a video call. I kept getting these fake emails, photos too, of me with other women, except I'd never seen these women before. I thought maybe I'd been hacked. I tried to explain, but Haley shut down. Her parents were constantly in her ear. They told her I had a pattern, that they'd done a background check. And I believed they could ruin me if I pushed back. He sent me copies of the emails and text. Grainy, poorly photoshopped, but convincing enough for someone already full of doubt. One piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Then I contacted old friends of Haley's, people she'd lost touch with over the years. Classmates, colleagues, even a friend she once called her second sister. Many of them said the same thing. They'd felt pushed out, like Haley became harder to reach the moment they questioned anything about her family. They never said anything direct, one woman told me, but there was always this pressure, like I didn't fit, like they were watching. I gathered screenshots, messages, testimonies. I called in favors from old clients to help recover deleted voicemails, even tracked down a former neighbor of the Davenports who'd moved states after a dispute involving Diane, something about spreading rumors after being disinvited from a neighborhood board. Meanwhile, Vanessa kept feeding me footage, clips from dinner parties where Diane whispered pointed remarks to Haley when she thought no one was listening, conversations between her and Gerald in which they discussed Haley's emotional instability, how she needed to be redirected or refocused, and then the final clip that sealed everything. Gerald sipping bourbon telling Diane, once she leaves him, we'll bring her home, she can run the foundation, meet someone respectable, we'll make sure she's surrounded by the right kind of men. The plan wasn't just to break us up. It was to reset her life, rewrite her choices. They saw her as a project to be corrected, not a woman capable of making decisions on her own. I compiled everything onto a single USB drive, labeled it Truth, and then I invited Owen and Vanessa to dinner. I didn't tell Haley the full reason why, just said it was important. She agreed, though I could see her nerves were frayed, tired from 2 weeks of silence, pulled between loyalty and doubt. After we ate, I turned on the TV and plugged in the USB. There's something you both need to see. For the next hour, the screen played a narrative they had never been shown, not with words or accusations, but with facts, footage, recordings, emails, medical records, voicemails, testimonies, a carefully ordered chronology of control. Haley sat frozen on the couch. Owen shifted restlessly in his seat. By the time it ended, the room was silent. Haley turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you show me this sooner? Because I needed you to see everything, I said. Not just what they did to me, what they've done to you your entire life. Hurriedly stood abruptly, pacing. No, this isn't them. That's not my parents. Vanessa reached for his arm. It is, Owen. They did the same thing to us. You just didn't want to believe it. But why? He asked, face pale. Why would they do this to their own children? Because they don't see us as people, Haley said softly. They see us as projects. They don't love, at least not the way we need. They control. And if they can't control, they destroy. That night, Haley didn't turn away in bed. She didn't say, I need time. Instead, she took my hand and held it tightly against her chest. "I believe you," she whispered. "I'm sorry I doubted you." For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. But the fight wasn't over. Because now that Haley knew, there was only one thing left to do: confront the Davenports, together. Diane called the next morning. Her voice was bright, unnaturally cheerful. "Hey, darling, your father and I think you should come stay with us for a few days. Clear your head. Marriage can be stressful, and sometimes space gives clarity." Haley didn't hesitate. She pressed the speakerphone button. "Mum," she said flatly, "I've seen the videos." Silence. "What videos?" Diane asked after a beat, her tone suddenly careful. "The footage of you in the kitchen. The recordings of you and Dad discussing how to break up our marriage." Another pause, then indignation. "Whatever Julian's shown you has been manipulated. You know he's always been jealous of our family, always trying to drive you away from us." Haley cut her off. "We're coming over tonight. Me, Julian, Owen, and Vanessa. We're going to talk. All of us, no more lies." She hung up before her mother could respond. That night, we arrived together. Owen and Vanessa met us outside, faces tense, eyes shadowed with long repressed uncertainty. Haley held my hand as we walked up to the porch, not with fear, but with resolve. Diane opened the door in a silk blouse and pearls, trying to look composed. Gerald stood behind her, posture straight, arms crossed. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding," Gerald said, gesturing for us to enter. I set my camera bag on the table. "No misunderstanding. I'm documenting this for the family archive." Diane's face tightened. "This is private business." "Exactly," I replied, adjusting my tripod. "Family business, and I'm family, despite everything you've done to deny it." We sat in their formal living room, the same room where so many Sunday dinners had unfolded, where so many of their condescending remarks had quietly chipped away at us. But this time, the floor belonged to us. For the next 2 hours, we walked them through the timeline, the drink, the medical results, the footage, the manipulation. Thomas, the pattern, the people they had pushed out of Haley's life, the marriages they'd tried to sabotage. Every time they denied it, I pressed play on another video, held up another email, quoted another text message. Diane's tears came, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of someone watching their mask slip in front of the very people they had spent years deceiving. Gerald remained quiet longer, but his silence eventually cracked into anger. "This is a setup," he snapped. "You've twisted everything, fabricated a narrative." Haley stood up. "No," she said, voice firm and steady. "You did this. You built this narrative. Julian didn't destroy our family. You did, over the years, slowly, strategically. You broke trust, poisoned relationships, and used guilt like a leash. And now that it's finally come to light, you want to pretend it's fiction." Owen stood beside her, his voice quieter but no less certain. "We're done living in your version of reality." Diane collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, not apologizing, just panicking at the loss of control. As we prepared to leave, I handed Gerald a USB drive. "This contains everything," I said. "Footage, emails, testimony. You're welcome to keep it." "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "It means I'm not here to ruin you. Not unless you force me to. If you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever manipulate Haley or speak against me, this drive will go to your business partners, your board members, your country club, and your foundation network." For the first time since I'd known him, Gerald didn't look condescending. He looked like he was calculating and losing. "And you're more dangerous than I thought," he said. I met his eyes. "I'm not dangerous. Just done playing your game." In the weeks following the confrontation, things grew quiet. Not awkward, was quiet, not the uneasy silence of avoidance, but the deliberate, cautious quiet of people learning their place. Diane and Gerald didn't reach out, and Haley didn't chase them. There were no long phone calls, no invitations to brunch, no veiled apologies. It was silence. And it was exactly what we needed. Haley and Owen began attending therapy together at first, then separately. They were unraveling decades of emotional conditioning, digging through memories they hadn't questioned until now. It wasn't easy. Sometimes Haley would come home quiet, sometimes angry, sometimes broken-hearted. But she never doubted again. She no longer tried to defend her parents' behavior or rationalize it. She saw it for what it was. control, dressed as love. Meanwhile, Gerald and Diane kept their distance. Occasionally they would send a text message, brief surface level things, I hope all is well, or thinking of you, but we didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Then a month before the holidays, we received an invitation in the mail, a fresh start. That was the heading on the embossed card. They were inviting us all to dinner, Haley, me, Owen, and Vanessa. Let's begin again, the note said. No baggage, no hard feelings. Haley looked at me, unsure. They're still my parents, she said, and they're trying. Isn't that something? I nodded. We can go, but we set the terms. And we did. We stayed at a hotel nearby. We drove separately. And most importantly, we agreed, no alone time. No opportunities for quiet manipulation. When we arrived, everything looked familiar and different. The table was set. Diane smiled, nervous and a little too rehearsed. Gerald was polite. He asked about my work, about the gallery opening I had planned for the spring. He nodded at my answers without smirking, without challenging. After dinner, he invited me into his study. He poured 2 glasses of scotch, handed me one, and said, I've been thinking about your future. Yeah, I raised an eyebrow. My future? Photography's fine, he said, but you're smart. You could be doing more. I could bring you into my firm, junior partner track. Salary would be generous, full benefits, a real position. I set the glass down, untouched. Why would you offer that? Asked. Your family, he said smoothly, and I respect how you handled things. You stood your ground. That's what a real man does. But I smiled faintly. No, Gerald, that's what someone who's done being manipulated does. His jaw tightened. Be reasonable. This is an olive branch. No, I said again. It's another leash. You're trying to tie me to something you can control. And the truth is, you can't stand that Haley loves me as I am, without your approval. His expression twisted. Everyone has a price. Not me, I said, and definitely not her. I stood and walked back to the dining room, where Diane was flipping through photo albums with Haley. You were so happy when you lived at home, Diane said, pointing to a picture of a teenage Haley on a beach trip. Haley looked up at me. She saw the look in my eyes and understood. She stood and said, Mom, Dad, we have something to tell you. Wait, everyone said. We're having a baby, she said clearly. Julian and I, we're 3 months along. Diane gasped, leapt up to hug her. Gerald offered her stiff congratulations, barely hiding the shock in his eyes. And I leaned in and said quietly, this child will never be your pawn. I promise you that. He said nothing, but he nodded, because he finally understood he had lost. 3 weeks after the pregnancy announcement, a letter arrived at our door, delivered by courier, sealed in a thick cream envelope and marked from the office of Gerald Davenport's attorney. Inside was a formal deed. The house we had been renting for the last 4 years, our home, had been quietly transferred into our name, free and clear. Along with it, papers for a trust fund established in the name of our unborn child. No note, no demands, no strings. Just cold, legal precision. It wasn't an apology. Jawa didn't apologize. It was an acknowledgement, maybe the only one he was capable of giving. We accepted it not because we wanted their money, but because we knew what it represented. Surrender, not to us, but to reality. They had lost control. They could no longer steer Haley's life like a ship in their fleet. And in the absence of that control, all they had left was the desperate hope of proximity. Eliza was born in early summer. We named her after my grandmother, a woman who had survived war, loss and heartbreak, and still managed to raise her family with kindness and dignity. That's the legacy I wanted to pass down, not the one shaped by manipulation and false smiles. When Diane and Gerald came to the hospital, they brought gifts, flowers, and a quietness I'd never seen in them before. They held Eliza briefly, posed for a photo under Haley's watchful eye, and left without offering advice or judgment. And for the first time, I didn't feel threatened by their presence, because I knew they couldn't reach us. Not anymore. Over the next few months, they remained in the periphery of our lives, present but distant. They no longer made suggestions about our careers, our finances, or our parenting. They didn't ask when Haley would return to work or whether we'd move into a better neighborhood. They stopped commenting on my profession altogether. They had finally learned to stay in their lane. Then, one day, a large envelope arrived from Gerald. Inside was a glossy brochure the annual report from his firm's philanthropic foundation. My photographs were featured throughout. Landscapes, portraits, architectural shots. Every image was mine, licensed through my agency, paid at full rate. At the bottom of the envelope was a single note, handwritten in sharp mechanical penmanship. Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy. I didn't call to thank him. Because this wasn't about thanks. This was about recognition. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, just the quiet admission that I had succeeded on my terms, that they had tried everything to shape me into someone else, and I had refused to bend. And in that refusal, I had built a life they couldn't corrupt. That spring, I opened my first gallery in downtown Nashville. Haley stood beside me, Eliza in her arms, as our guests wandered through the exhibit. My parents had flown in from Oregon, former clients, friends, mentors. They were all there, admiring the work that had taken years to build. Toward the end of the evening, Diane and Gerald arrived. They didn't stay long. Diane held Eliza for a few minutes, smiling for photos, and handed her back without fuss. Gerald walked the gallery slowly, nodded once at a portrait of a wild bison trudging through snow, and then extended his hand. "No suggestions tonight?" I asked, a faint smile on my lips. He gave a thin smile back. "Not anymore." That was all. That night, as we locked up the gallery and drove home, beneath a blanket of Appalachian stars, Haley looked at me in the dim light and asked, "Do you think they've changed?" I thought for a moment before answering. "No," I said honestly, "but they've accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes that's enough." Later, as Eliza slept in her crib and the house settled into quiet, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of tea. The mountains were shadowed outlines in the distance, the kind of landscape that reminded me how small we all are and how much power lies in choosing your path anyway. I realized then I hadn't won by fighting fire with fire. I hadn't destroyed them. I hadn't exposed them to the world. I had done something far more powerful and had lived well on my own terms, with truth, with patience, with boundaries they could no longer cross. And in the end, that was the most satisfying victory of all.